Our story begins 250,000 years ago, on a prehistoric Krypton, long before humanoid Kryptonians became the dominant species on the planet. During this time, Krypton was a violent, hellish world where only the strongest beasts could survive. This harsh environment attracted the attention of Bertrand, a mad scientist seeking to create the ultimate life form. To achieve this, he and his team dropped a newly born entity onto the planet, which died in less than 2 seconds. They would harvest its remains and use them to create a stronger, better version of this being through cloning. Eventually, the baby could survive for minutes, and later, hours, adapting to the planet's environment after each cycle of rebirth. After 30 years of experiments, Bertrand achieved 2 million years of evolution, and the creature fully adapted to the planet's atmosphere, although the beasts that roam this world still posed a threat to it. During this time, Bertrand grew increasingly obsessive and mad, eventually naming his creation the Ultimate. Following even more cycles of death and rebirth, the Ultimate now achieved immortality and could evolve to threats that killed it without relying on his creator's technology. It roamed Krypton for 2 years, and in its mission to live, the Ultimate hunted every dangerous beast on the planet to extinction, perhaps setting the stage for humanoid Kryptonians to eventually dominate the planet. Finally, Bertrand's vision came true. The Ultimate required no food or water, could survive in any environment, and was strong enough to kill any creature imaginable. And if it somehow was defeated, it would simply evolve to become stronger until its eventual victory. What Bertrand didn't realize, however, was that the creature remembered everything. It recalled every death inflicted on it by its creator, and decades of cruel experiments made it hate all life, particularly Kryptonian life. Its ultimate goal was to survive at any cost, and eliminate anything it considered hostile. So after all lethal monsters of Krypton were eliminated, the only threat that remained was its creator, Bertrand. The Ultimate attacked and killed its creator, ignoring his pleading for life. Following the scientist's death, his notes would be uncovered by humanoid Kryptonians, kick-starting a cloning tradition of the planet. The Ultimate, meanwhile, roamed the deserted world, but since Bertrand was not native, he relied on supplies from other worlds. So when one of the supply ships arrived, the Ultimate boarded it, and its fury was now unleashed across the cosmos. Over the years, it bounced from planet to planet, gaining a monstrous reputation, and eventually ended up on the planet Calaton. In only 3 years, it destroyed the entire planet, with only its capital city remaining. Desperate, the planet's royal family devised a solution. All monarchs of Catalan possessed superpowers, so they channeled all of their life energies into a single artificial being of pure energy, while sacrificing themselves in the process. This being became known as Radiant. The Ultimate was created to kill any form of life, but not energy. So after a week of grueling battle, Radiant emerged victorious, though their clash destroyed 1/5 of the entire planet. The people of Calaton followed their usual burial procedures and suited the creature and surrounded it with bars so its spirit wouldn't escape. Since it destroyed so much of the planet, it was decided that its body would be shot up into space. Eventually, its casket would get caught in an asteroid belt, and its trajectory would lead it toward Earth. Upon landing somewhere in the Midwest, the creature, now alive, broke out of its casket. When a bird landed on its hand, it killed it immediately without hesitation. It began wrecking the area, destroying forests and slaughtering animals. It eventually reached the highway where it continued its rampage, now attacking civilians. This attracted the attention of the Justice League, who immediately rushed to the scene, but even Earth's superheroes were no match for the Ultimate. In only a matter of minutes, it defeated all heroes present, with Guy Gardner and Blue Beetle ending up in critical condition. Superman, hearing about this on the news, rushed to aid his comrades. When he arrived, only Booster Gold was left standing, who told Superman that it felt like Doomsday itself had arrived. This line was apparently picked up by the media, who officially titled the creature Doomsday. The creature appeared to be particularly fixated on Superman, perhaps sensing that he was a Kryptonian. Upon clashing with Doomsday, Superman remarked that he had never been punched this hard in his entire life. Teaming up with the recovered Justice League, they all blasted the villain. But after a massive explosion, it emerged unscathed, with only its costume being damaged, revealing its face. Doomsday easily dispersed all heroes, destroyed the surrounding area, and fled once again. Superman pursued him, rescuing civilians along the way, but he soon came to a terrifying realization. Doomsday was heading toward Metropolis. He fought valiantly to contain the battle in a rural area with minimal casualties, but Doomsday managed to incapacitate the Man of Steel and set its course toward the city. Upon recovering, Superman immediately rushed towards Metropolis and pursued Doomsday once again. Their battle caused massive damage to the city, with Superman constantly distracted by the need to save civilians. In the end, he pinned Doomsday in one place and unleashed his full power, swearing to kill this creature even if it cost him his life. Lois Lane and Jimmy Olsen were present, reporting the battle live, while Jonathan and Martha Kent observed the fight from their TV in Smallville. With both of their costumes completely torn, Doomsday briefly tossed Superman aside and turned his attention to Jimmy and Lois, but the Man of Steel recovered just in time to stop the villain. In their final clash, both combatants punched each other so hard that the windows around them shattered completely. Exhausted and battered, Superman finally delivered the fatal blow, but so did Doomsday. After a grueling battle, Superman finally defeated his greatest enemy yet, but at the cost of his own life. The entire world, including Superman's parents, his teammates, and his friends, watched as the world's greatest hero died in front of their eyes. To say that this storyline was impactful would be an understatement. No one truly expected DC to kill off their most popular and beloved superhero, yet they did. Actual real-life mainstream media publications reported on the death of Superman as if it were a monumental event, which greatly contributed to the comic's already high sales figures, and its writer, Dan Jurgens, became an industry superstar. Even Superman's original co-creator, Jerry Siegel, stated that he was impressed by the story. Obviously, Superman didn't stay dead permanently. In less than a year, the Man of Steel returned to the pages of the comic books with a new black costume and an updated haircut, but he would soon discover that in his absence, the world had changed in unexpected ways. Following Superman's death, 4 new heroes emerged in Metropolis, with some of them claiming to be the real Superman brought back to life. All of these characters were or became mainstays in DC canon, showing up in various adaptations as well. So, in today's video, let's take a look at an in-depth history of each of the 4 replacements for Superman and how they fit into the wider DC universe. So, without any further delays, let's take a look at our first entry, Steel. Like mentioned above, 4 new heroes emerged after Superman's death, each carrying one of Superman's many titles or nicknames. A genius engineer and construction worker known as John Henry Irons would inherit the name the Man of Steel. The character is actually heavily inspired by African-American folk hero John Henry, a railroad worker who competed against a mechanical drill and won through sheer will and determination, but at the cost of his own life, dying with a hammer in his hand as his heart gave out. A man who later became Steel was named after the folk hero as he beat machines using muscles, while the new John Henry would use his brains to become the machine's master. Unfortunately, John's parents died during his childhood and he was raised by his grandparents. At one point, he concluded that the best way to protect his family was to become rich and powerful. Using his exceptional talent as a baseball player, he acquired a scholarship and went to Yale University, becoming an exceptional engineer and weapons manufacturer. He was noticed by a corporation known as Amertech Industries, who provided him with a job. He became incredibly successful and wealthy while working for the company. There, he also met a woman named Angora, with whom he became romantically involved. One of the weapons he designed was the BG-60, but John discovered that those weapons were in the hands of a fictional foreign country which used them against the civilian population. John arrived at the scene of battle only to discover the brutal aftermath. Countless men, women, and children lay dead, with the army commander dismissing them as the consequence of war. Following this moment, John's entire perspective on life changed. He no longer cared about money and was consumed by guilt for being a weapons engineer. He erased all data about his new, even more powerful weapon, BG-80, and to hide from Amertech, he fled his hometown of Washington, D.C. and moved to Metropolis, adopting a new, very creative fake name, Henry Johnson. He lived in Metropolis in relative poverty, earning a living by working in construction. During one of his work days, his coworker fell from the construction site, but John Henry rushed to his rescue. He grabbed the cable, swung toward the man, and dragged him to safety. But unfortunately, the cable snapped and John began falling to his doom. He later reminisced about this moment, saying that his entire life flashed through his mind, realizing that he could never undo his mistakes. But before he could fall, Superman arrived to rescue him. John told the hero that he owed him his life, to which Superman responded that he should make it count for something. At that moment, John knew he had to repay him. When Superman was fighting Doomsday, John quit his worksite and rushed to help, but the buildings around them were ravaged and he was buried under the rubble. Following Superman's death, crime in Metropolis increased sharply. Gangs and crime bosses took advantage and made life in the city increasingly difficult. While sharing the story of the original John Henry with some kids, local gangsters arrived and blasted one of the kids with an advanced weapon. John rushed toward the attacker and caught up to the car on foot, but the gang managed to dispose of him and flee. He also noticed that the weapons those gangsters used resembled weapons he created years ago while working for Amertech. Realizing that the city desperately needed Superman, he decided to honor the man who once saved his life by adopting his role as a protector and peacekeeper of Metropolis. He went down to his basement where he forged a suit of armor with a hammer while recounting the story of John Henry, saying that he too is fighting a machine, but of a different kind, the one he helped put in motion. The gangsters from earlier actually followed him and tossed an explosive into the basement, setting the building ablaze. But John, now wearing a new suit with the iconic S symbol and a cape, emerged and saved his upstairs neighbor before the building exploded. His neighbor, who claimed to be a fortune teller, later shared this encounter with the press, insisting that it was the real Superman who saved her. This is what makes Steel different from other Superman replacements. He never called himself Superman, and unlike others, focused solely on saving others. People of Metropolis assumed that he was Superman, not only because of his costume's resemblance, but because John embodied Superman's spirit and heroism the most. Following this rescue, he followed the gangsters who attacked him and ambushed their hideout, discovering that they were indeed using weapons of his design. Interestingly, the gangsters were using the BG-80 weapon, which John Henry erased before leaving the company. Seeing his weapons used for murder flooded John with traumatic memories as he blamed himself for all the deaths they caused. But he managed to gather his thoughts in the moment and declared that the deaths would end now. Capturing one of the gang members, he interrogated him and the gangster revealed the supplier's name, a woman who went by the name White Rabbit. Unbeknownst to John, however, White Rabbit had been observing them all along. She killed the gangster but spared John, somehow knowing his identity and insisting that he could be blackmailed or won over. Lex Luthor, meanwhile, was carefully observing all unfolding events and uncovered White Rabbit's operation, also seeking to blackmail Steel. If you are wondering why Lex Luthor looks like this, it's because at the time he had transferred his mind into a younger body and posed as his own son. He was also in a relationship with Supergirl, who in typical 90s comics fashion was not a Kryptonian, but some kind of shapeshifter. Following those events, Steel had a bit of a side mission where he confronted alien parasites who had infected Metropolis and were linked to some murders around the city, but he returned to fighting gangs and uncovering their suppliers soon after. He tried to ambush them in a place without civilians, but it was becoming too difficult. Seeking more information about the White Rabbit, he once again captured one of the gang members, but the man was killed by a nearby cameraman, who was actually a gangster in disguise, telling him that the rabbit didn't want to be found. Now grabbing the cameraman, Steel asked for information, but the gangster said that he would rather take his chances with Steel instead of the White Rabbit. Steel made sure to use the camera to record those events as evidence, but Lex Luthor went above and beyond to make sure to acquire the tape before the police could lay their hands on it. He also tasked his assistant with uncovering White Rabbit's identity and location. While confronting another gang, Steel came across Superboy and later scolded him for not taking his job seriously. At this moment, he was approached by Luthor and one of his goon squads, and yes, that is their actual name. They revealed White Rabbit's location and proposed a team-up, but Steel refused, saying that this was not a popularity contest. Unbeknownst to him, Luthor planted a bug on his armor. When he arrived at White Rabbit's base, he saw that she was actually his old girlfriend Angora, who immediately recognized Steel as John Henry Irons. When John quit the company, Angora apparently had a backup of his more advanced weapons, which she sold on the streets, earning considerable wealth. She offered John to join her business, saying they could improve and perfect those designs, but John refused, saying that by designing those weapons, he became responsible for the deaths of innocents and wouldn't repeat the same mistake. In response to his refusal, the White Rabbit blasted him, but thankfully Superboy was outside just in time to rescue him before he sustained serious injuries. When he returned to White Rabbit's base, she had already fled. Sometime later, Steel came into conflict with another Superman replacement, the Eradicator, who genuinely believed that he was Superman reincarnated. While fighting another gang, the Eradicator arrived and killed one of the members. Steel objected, saying that those gangsters posed no threat to him, and if they did, the real Superman would never resort to murder. He called the Eradicator a fraud, which angered him, igniting the battle. Their clash took them towards space, and when they fell back to Earth, they ended up all the way in Coast City on the west coast. During the battle, Steel actually managed to gain the upper hand and used it to remind the Eradicator that being Superman was more than possessing incredible power. He was a hero with compassion whose main goal was to help people. This surprisingly worked, and the Eradicator withdrew from the battle and told Steel to return to Metropolis, saying the city was in good hands. Lex Luthor, meanwhile, tracked down the White Rabbit and used his goon squad to capture her. Luthor's plan was to kill two birds with one stone. He told White Rabbit that he was handing Steel to her on a silver platter, setting up a confrontation between the two. Either one of them, or both, would die, benefiting Lex either way. White Rabbit accepted, thinking she was playing him as well, planning to destroy Lex after she dealt with Steel. When John arrived in Metropolis by plane, he was ambushed by White Rabbit's forces at the airport. He immediately rescued the plane's pilot and then engaged in battle. One of White Rabbit's lackeys actually had superpowers and could increase his size, briefly overwhelming Steel, but Steel disposed of him using his jet boots that allowed him to fly. He took White Rabbit and asked her to show one of her manufacturing plants. There, she likened John's weapons to demons in a Pandora's box, saying that once they're released, they cannot be erased. She then revealed that she anticipated everything and had a trap set up in the factory. She immobilized John Henry and set up a bomb, but she greatly underestimated his strength. Steel gathered all his power and managed to break free. He left the factory but couldn't drag White Rabbit out in time, and she was supposedly killed. Lex, meanwhile, came out victorious. He not only uncovered the designs, but also learned Steel's identity from the White Rabbit. Around this time, Superman returned. He was reborn in his Fortress of Solitude in Antarctica and had to travel all the way to Metropolis on foot in Kryptonian war armor, as he was depowered following his resurrection. When he finally arrived in the city, he was greeted by Steel, Lex Luthor, Superboy, and Lois, who were all skeptical, especially considering he didn't possess the same strength and couldn't fly. But the urgency of the situation compelled all heroes to team up and rush to Coast City, and since Superman couldn't fly, he had to use Steel's jet boots to travel. This is where Superman referred to John Henry as Steel for the first time, as before this moment he was referred to as the Man of Steel. On the way, Steel noted that he felt such a commanding presence only from Superman, further clearing his doubt. He was fully convinced in the final battle, which we'll discuss more in detail in our next entry. What you need to know so far is that the Green Lantern Hal Jordan defeated the villain Mongol using Steel's hammer. Following the victory and the official return of Superman, now back with his powers, Steel decided to retire as a superhero, but still continued his investigation regarding his weapons, as they were still in circulation. He informed Superman that the best way to uncover this mystery was by confronting the people he used to work for. And to do that, he needed to return to Washington, D.C. Around this time, Steel became so popular that he received his own solo series, as well as a movie where he was portrayed by Shaquille O'Neal, although it had terrible reception. In his solo series, Steel returns to Washington, where we are introduced to his family, his grandparents, sister-in-law, and his nieces and nephews, as well as his brother. Interestingly, his family knew that John Henry was Steel, immediately recognizing him as soon as they heard about a new hero. The most important character here is his niece Natasha, who in the future inherits the Steel mantle and becomes a superhero in her own right. In Washington, he discovered that his weapons were still in the hands of gangs, and they also used a new advanced serum that granted them super strength. He further discovered that one of his nephews might be involved with a local gang. John was caught in a crossfire, but he managed to survive. While at home with his family, the house was attacked by Amertech forces, revealing that they knew about his identity. Realizing the gravity of the situation and the danger he put his family in, he reforged his armor, but this time without the iconic S symbol on the chest. John believed that this time his battle might be outside of the law, and he didn't want to tarnish Superman's symbol. His solo comic mostly dealt with him fighting Amertech, and later in the series, John moved to New Jersey, where he opened the hospital. Around this time, Steel was recruited by Batman into the Justice League. Batman believed that the League relied too much on heavy hitters like Superman and needed more people with exceptional intelligence. John Henry was actually stated to be one of the 3 most intelligent people on the planet. He became so well respected by his superhero peers that when the Justice League left to the future during the DC 1 Million event, Steel was appointed as the leader of a backup team that remained in the present. At some point, John returned to Metropolis, where he built a workshop with his niece named Steelworks. He realized that his true gift is engineering, and used his talent to create weapons once again. This time, they were non-lethal and would end up in the hands of Metropolis's Special Crime Unit. He became a close friend of Superman, even helping him rebuild the Fortress of Solitude. Around this time is when it was revealed that Steel knew about Superman's identity. During the Imperiex War storyline, Steel was supposedly killed, but was brought back to life in the Entropy Aegis, a powerful set of armor designed on Apocalypse. He kept the armor even after the event, but became increasingly dependent on it, which began affecting his psyche. When Steel attacked his niece, Superman intervened, and then both of them rushed to Apocalypse to remove the armor. Those events caused John Henry to retire once again, passing the mantle of Steel to his niece Natasha. But obviously his retirement didn't last long, and John returned as a hero. Both him and Natasha continued appearing in the comics. John even gained some temporary superpowers, which turned him into a literal Man of Steel. He would later lead his own team of heroes known as Infinity Inc. In Reign of Doomsdays, which is one of the last storylines published by DC before the reboot, John battled a clone of Doomsday made of steel, created by Lex Luthor to eliminate all 4 replacements of Superman. John was defeated, with his comic referencing the panels of Death of Superman. Following the Flashpoint reboot, Steel's character was reinvented. He now worked with the military to create weapons against alien invasions, but while working with Luthor, he witnessed his cruelty against Superman and resigned. Shortly after, he used one of his suits to protect Metropolis from Brainiac. The later comics also established him as the romantic partner of Lana Lang, and together with John's niece Natasha, they're known as Team Steel. The reboot also established that Steel is the grandnephew of a short-lived superhero of the 1950s, also named John Henry Irons. The Cyborg Superman. Probably one of the most interesting characters in this storyline is its main villain, Hank Henshaw, also known as the Cyborg Superman. He wasn't actually introduced in the Reign of the Superman storyline. He first appeared a few years prior, but hadn't assumed his cyborg persona yet. At the time, he was merely a scientist seeking to explore space. He was one of the 4 crew members of LexCorp's shuttle, alongside his wife Terry and his friends Jim and Steven. During their journey into space, each crew member was exposed to cosmic radiation, and upon crashing back on Earth, the bodies of Jim and Steven were destroyed, though their minds survived. They managed to reassemble their bodies, seemingly possessing new abilities as a result of being exposed to radiation. Steven made his body out of pure energy, and Jim absorbed nearby rocks, gravel, and wreckage to create a disfigured body. Hank and Terry seemingly had no side effects yet. They all rushed to Metropolis seeking help, but were attacked by the guards at LexCorp. This is where Superman arrived, and realizing these people were in danger, he decided to help. But they were all short on time. Hank's skin began to decay, and Terry began disappearing, seemingly shifting into another dimension. Steven, meanwhile, grew more unhinged and eventually flew into space. Although Superman followed him, he lost track, and Steven flew into the sun, dying. Back at the base, Hank managed to find a solution, but he was too late. By the time Superman arrived, he was already dead, and in his last breath, begged Superman to save his wife. Although Terry was saved, Jim, who was also present, took his own life after entering an MRI chamber which killed him instantly. Terry remained as the sole survivor of that event, or at least that's what everyone thought. If it wasn't clear, this storyline is a dark pastiche of Marvel's Fantastic Four, and Cyborg Superman is essentially DC's Maker before the Maker was even introduced. It is unclear why DC published such a dark story in Superman of all series, but some of these characters would return. Hank Henshaw didn't die that night. The radiation gave him the ability to possess and control technology. Though his physical body decayed, his mind survived inside computers. Weeks later, we see Terry again. She became numb, detached, and emotionless, traumatized by the accident. This is where Hank managed to construct a new body out of metal scraps and tried talking to her, but she was terrified. Her husband's death and his subsequent bizarre rebirth were too much for Terry. She descended further into insanity and was left in a catatonic coma. Hank continued wandering the facility, unaware of his wife's fate. Reconstructing his body apparently emitted a vast amount of energy that disrupted communications, causing outages. Superman arrived to investigate and learned that the disfigured droid was actually Hank, surprising him. Hank said that he was only looking for his wife, but Terry's psychiatrist, who was also present, informed him of her condition. Devastated, Hank concluded that his mere presence hurt the person he loved most, and without her, he had no place on Earth. His thirst for knowledge, however, still persisted. He decided to use his abilities to explore the vastness of the cosmos. Using NASA communications equipment, Henshaw beamed his mind into the birthing matrix that had carried Superman from Krypton, which was in orbit above Earth. Hank crafted a small exploration craft from the birthing matrix and departed. Although Superman tried to stop him, insisting that there was still hope, Hank didn't listen and journeyed away. Surprisingly, Hank blamed Superman for the accident, perhaps growing mad due to radiation. He wandered the cosmos, exploring various worlds until landing on a small planet made of farmers, which had recently been conquered by an alien warlord and Superman's enemy, Mongol. Mongol uses a planet-like structure called Warworld to conquer other worlds. But following his defeat, his weapons were exhausted and the Warworld was lost, so conquering such a small planet was the best he could do. When Hank arrived on his planet, he sensed Mongol's mutual hatred of Superman and demanded an audience. In response, the alien tyrant blasted the visitor, unaware that Hank could survive inside technology. Realizing he needed to subjugate Mongol, Hank constructed a massive machine out of wreckage to instill fear. When Mongol still refused, Hank resorted to the only language the tyrant could understand: pain. He tortured Mongol until the alien submitted. Hank then proposed a team-up. He'd get revenge against Earth while Mongol would turn it into a new war world to resume his conquests. When Hank returned to Earth and discovered that Superman had been killed by Doomsday, he decided to tarnish the hero's reputation instead. Using knowledge from the birth matrix, he constructed a cyborg body, one half identical to Superman's, and the other made of Kryptonian alloys. The first thing he did was vaporize the plaque at Superman's memorial, claiming that he was Superman reborn. He then raided a facility known as Project Cadmus, which held Doomsday's body. Using his ability to control technology, he opened the vault and stole Doomsday's corpse. Flying into space, he chained it to an asteroid and sent it drifting across the cosmos, choosing a route that would supposedly carry it into an infinite void. As a precaution, he added a warning device to alert him if Doomsday's bonds were ever disturbed. After returning to Earth, he met with Lois Lane, claiming that his memories were hazy and that he couldn't recall much of his life. When Lois asked for proof, Cyborg said the only thing he could remember was a farm in Kansas and the name Kent, likely knowledge extracted from the birth matrix. Lois then took him to Professor Hamilton, who examined his body and confirmed that his organic half was genetically identical to Superman's, declaring him Superman reborn. Adopting the moniker the Man of Tomorrow, he became a hero, though the public was unaware of his true intentions. Later, Cyborg saved the American president from an assassination attempt, earning him government recognition. He requested access to the White House computer systems, gaining control of classified data. Using this information, he discovered that the attackers had a backup plan. They had swapped Maxwell Lord's suitcase with an explosive device. After exposing and removing the threat, Cyborg's reputation grew, and the government officially endorsed him as the true Superman. The assassination attempt was witnessed by Ronald Troop, a young journalist who had replaced Clark Kent at the Daily Planet. Troop reported that incident and also believed Cyborg was the real Superman. Like Steel, Cyborg soon faced strange alien parasites, a recurring threat in the series. Around this time, he also met with Lex Luthor. Meanwhile, Mongol's warship was heading toward Earth, specifically toward Coast City, where the Eradicator was located. The White House informed Cyborg Superman of the approaching vessel, and he claimed to suspect that the Eradicator was collaborating with the aliens. Upon arrival in Coast City, he saw that the Eradicator was genuinely trying to save the city, but Cyborg stopped him. While Mongol unleashed explosives, Cyborg kept the Eradicator occupied long enough for the city to be annihilated. There were roughly 77,000 bombs, enough to level a city of 7 million people. This remains as one of the most significant events in DC history, as it's exceedingly rare for an entire city to be permanently destroyed in mainstream comics. Coast City remained in ruins and uninhabited for years before eventually being rebuilt, but the deaths and destruction were never undone. This tragedy also marked the beginning of Hal Jordan's transformation, Coast City being his hometown, into the villain Parallax. In the aftermath, Mongol and Hank began constructing a new world in its place. Meanwhile, Cyborg, now teaming up with Superboy, made a public statement blaming the Eradicator for the attack. In that interview, however, he slipped and said that he wished he had as much confidence in his powers as Superboy in his teenage years. This was noticed by Lois Lane, who knew that Superman's powers didn't manifest during his teenage years. Steel also mistrusted Cyborg, as he had fought the Eradicator to a standstill before, and believed that Cyborg and Superboy shouldn't have much trouble dealing with him. Superboy, believing that Cyborg was telling the truth, accompanied him to Coast City, but Hank betrayed and imprisoned him. During the battle, Hank noted that Superboy was quite quite weak for a Kryptonian, which caused him to greatly underestimate Superboy's strength. Superboy turned out to be strong enough to break out of prison and rush to Metropolis seeking help. Meanwhile, Hank created a fake transmission and tricked the Justice League into thinking that more warships were coming from outer space, causing the League to temporarily leave Earth, essentially giving Hank freedom to do whatever he wanted. Around this time, Superman returned and rushed to Coast City alongside Steel, Superboy, and Supergirl. Since Superman was depowered, he had to use guns to advance through Mongul's forces. As they got closer to Cyborg, both he and Mongul realized that the real Superman was back. They also released a massive rocket toward Metropolis, forcing Superboy to leave Coast City and rush to the East Coast to intercept it. Seeing the real Superman made Hank realize that he could take revenge this time, and set out to kill him personally. Mongul, meanwhile, concluded that Cyborg had gone completely mad and betrayed him. He ordered his subordinates to ignite the engine, which would cause Earth to fall out of orbit, leading to its destruction. Mongul said that he was tired of this planet and would build his war world elsewhere, swearing never to bow down to Cyborg Superman again. It was revealed that kryptonite was at the heart of the engine, powering it. Realizing that the engine had been activated, Steel rushed to the engine room, while Superman fought Mongul head-on. In the engine room, Steel was confronted by Cyborg in a mechanical construct. He told Steel that he wasn't the true Man of Steel, and wasn't strong or smart enough to stop such an advanced engine. During the battle, however, Cyborg made a crucial mistake, and Steel tricked him into revealing a way to stop the engine, allowing him to grind it to a halt. Meanwhile, Superman was beaten by Mongul. Even with Supergirl's help, he was no match for the alien. Hank's mind returned to his cyborg body, and he sensed that Hal Jordan was approaching Earth from outer space. He could have prevented him from entering Warworld, but chose not to, knowing that Hal would fight Mongul immediately. This way, Superman would be left alive, allowing Cyborg to exact revenge personally, while Mongul would be defeated by Green Lantern as punishment for his betrayal. Hal indeed defeated Mongul, while Superman pursued Cyborg for a final confrontation. Cyborg immobilized everyone except Superman, even taking control of Steel's armor and nearly suffocating him. This was when Cyborg revealed his identity as Hank Henshaw to Superman. Their battle took place in the engine room, where Hank released kryptonite. But with the help of the Eradicator, who also arrived on the scene, Hank was immobilized. As a last resort, he unleashed a kryptonite blast toward Superman, but the Eradicator managed to cover him. In the end, Cyborg assumed Superman was dead, but he not only survived, but emerged with his powers fully restored. Now more powerful than ever, Superman grabbed Hank and shook him apart to pieces, eliminating the threat. Hank, however, didn't die. Remember the device he put on Doomsday's body before throwing him into space? He transferred his mind there, believing it was the safest place for him at the time. Doomsday eventually ended up on Apokolips, where he wreaked havoc and even defeated Darkseid. Meanwhile, Hank reconstructed his body, now with apocalyptian armor, and began rebuilding Warworld once again. Thankfully, Superman arrived and fought Hank. Darkseid's subordinates teleported Doomsday to a faraway location. After Darkseid recovered, he gathered all his power into Omega Beams and blasted Hank, seemingly destroying him. In reality, Darkseid stored his consciousness in a small orb. After months of imprisonment, Darkseid released him to wreak havoc under the condition that he never returned to Apokolips, to which Hank agreed. He continued to appear in Superman comics and even appeared in a Marvel crossover where he met Mr. Fantastic, essentially his Marvel counterpart. In the 2000s, Hank was redefined as not only a foe of Superman, but also an enemy of Green Lantern, as he was the one who destroyed Coast City, Hal Jordan's hometown. He took control of the Manhunters, androids created by the Guardians of the Universe, to patrol the cosmos before the Green Lantern Corps. Using Kryptonian technology, he upgraded the Manhunters, allowing them to drain Green Lantern's power. This time, Hank's motive was quite different. He longed for death, something not even Superman could grant him. After being defeated by Green Lantern, he ended up in the custody of the Guardians, but was broken out by the Yellow Lanterns. He became a member of the Sinestro Corps, fighting alongside them, and was promised a final death at the hands of the Anti-Monitor. He did end up dying in battle, but the Manhunters, confused without a leader, tracked down what remained of his body and reconstructed him, bringing him back to life even though he didn't want to be. He later tried to dominate the Alpha Lanterns, a fusion of Manhunters and Green Lanterns, but was destroyed once again by Green Lantern Boudica. After trying to transfer minds, her strong will managed to overpower him. He returned for the last time after Lex Luthor unleashed clones of Doomsday. The presence of Doomsday overrode Henshaw's desire to die, and he vowed to destroy the beast once and for all. However, Doomsday transformed into Cyborg Doomsday, and Hank was defeated. In the reboot, the mantle of Cyborg Superman was actually assumed by a different character, Zor-El, Superman's uncle who survived Krypton's destruction but was turned into a cyborg in the process. A few years later, however, Hank returned as Cyborg Superman, with an origin almost identical to his original one before the reboot. He once again became an enemy of both Superman and Green Lantern. Superboy. Another character that emerged in this period is Superboy. Interestingly, the name Superboy was used by Superman in the past in comic series which explored his teenage years. This Superboy, however, is completely different, albeit a clone of Superman. Following Superman's death, the scientist at Project Cadmus, who specialized in genetic engineering, created a clone of Superman by splicing Kryptonian DNA with that of a human. He was aged up to his teenage years and implanted with high school level knowledge and education. Cadmus planned to install a way to control him, but the Newsboy Legion freed him, with one of them giving him the iconic leather jacket. While he didn't claim to be Superman's reborn and was quite open about being his clone, he still referred to himself as Superman, and even when the media labeled him as Superboy, he objected, saying that this wasn't his name. He made his bombastic public entrance by saving a woman from a car crash, showing off while rescuing her. He then stormed the Daily Planet when he saw that his appearance was on page 6 of the newspaper, while he expected to be on the front page. He made advances on Lois, who turned him down. He then went after a different reporter who worked for the Daily Planet, Tana Moon. She got an exclusive interview with him on the TV network GBS, where Superboy publicly revealed that he was a clone but didn't possess all the memories of the original Superman. He fought a supervillain shortly after, with the GBS crew following him in a helicopter, carefully recording his exploits. Superboy's priority was fame and popularity, not helping people. During the battle, he managed to defeat the villain, but his jacket was destroyed, so GBS gave him a new jacket with the S symbol on the back. Superboy was later approached by Guardian, a hero working for Cadmus, who informed him that they weren't seeking to capture him, but warned him that things aren't always as simple as they seem, and that he wouldn't always have a guardian angel. Superboy continued working with GBS, with the network even arranging some battles to maximize ratings. While naive and cocky, Superboy's attitude would soon begin to change. While flying, he noticed a helicopter with Lois in it. He began conversing, but some thugs in the city noticed him and opened fire. Superboy began dodging their bullets and taunting them, unaware that they hit the helicopter in the back. Thankfully, Steel was nearby and rescued Lois, but the helicopter's pilot died in the shootout. Steel refused all interviews while Superboy was happy talking to the press. This is where Steel grabbed him away from reporters and took him to the top of a bridge, where he scolded the boy for his cockiness and irresponsibility. He told Superboy that he was too reckless, that he didn't even consider the helicopter behind him could have gotten hurt, and that he didn't even know a pilot had died before Steel told him. Although Superboy told him that he didn't want to be lectured, in reality he began feeling remorse and guilt for causing the pilot's death. In the meantime, Lex Luthor began eyeing Superboy. During one of his rescues live on TV, Supergirl arrived on the scene and helped Superboy. She then invited him to dinner in LexCorp's headquarters with her and Lex, to which Superboy agreed. At the dinner, Lex offered him a job at LexCorp. Liking the prospect of working alongside Supergirl, Superboy agreed immediately. Unknown to Lex, immediately after leaving, GBS appointed a man named Rex Leach as his manager and told him to sign a contract that forbade Superboy from working for other companies, as well as trademarking the name Superman. Superboy, who had a crush on Rex's daughter, signed without a second thought. Tana Moon, who in the meantime was growing more concerned about Superboy, said that he shouldn't be manipulated by anyone around him, but her boss dismissed her, saying that she was replaceable while Superboy wasn't. The network continued arranging battles for Superboy and even went as far as hiring an actual assassin to battle him. He battled a villain known as the Stinger, who at first gave Superboy some trouble but was eventually defeated. As a plan B, Stinger destroyed the bridge they were standing on and fled. Thankfully, Supergirl arrived, and with her help, they rescued all the civilians. This is where he told Supergirl that he signed a contract with Leach. Needless to say, Lex was furious, thinking that Superboy had double-crossed him. Following Cyborg's destruction of Coast City, Superboy was initially oblivious, until Tana Moon stormed into his room to tell him what had happened, and that the government was calling him to investigate. During their conversation, Tana admitted she had grown fond of Superboy, and considered him a friend, asking him to be careful. Superboy believed Cyborg's lies and accompanied him to Coast City, where he was betrayed. Cyborg destroyed a TV crew that was following them, and then attacked Superboy, easily overpowering the young hero while taunting that the real Superman would have been able to fight back. Superboy lost the battle because he didn't actually possess Kryptonian powers. Instead, he had tactile telekinesis, which allowed him to simulate strength in flight. He would later gain true Kryptonian abilities in the comics. While imprisoned, the villains revealed that their next target was Metropolis, giving Superboy enough determination to break free. Unlocking new potential in his abilities, he broke the chains and rushed toward Metropolis, just as the real Superman returned. Together with Superman and Steel, he headed to Coast City to confront Cyborg, but the villain launched a missile toward Metropolis. At the last second, Superboy mounted the missile, determined to stop it before it could reach the city, while Superman and Steel pursued the villains. Superboy tried his best to disable the missile mid-flight, but lacked the technical knowledge to disarm it. As it approached Metropolis, he came up with a desperate plan: to redirect it. When the missile was about to hit the Daily Planet building, Superboy threw himself in front of it, used all his strength, and successfully diverted it toward the harbor, where it exploded harmlessly. Although no one in the city was killed, Superboy was caught in the blast. Tana Moon reported the event live, but broke down in tears, believing her friend had died. Thankfully, Superboy survived, though gravely injured, and could not rejoin the battle immediately. Like the other Superman replacements, he had also faced the strange alien parasites, and was the one who ultimately defeated them. After full recovery, he returned to Coast City and rescued Steel. When Cyborg was defeated and Superman's powers restored, Superboy declared that this was the real Superman, the one and only. Following these events, Superboy, like Steel, received his own solo series, relocating to Hawaii and becoming the state's protector for a time. In 1998, Superboy joined Impulse and Tim Drake to form Young Justice, a team of young superheroes. During this era, he grew close to both teammates. In Superboy issue number 59, Superman took him to the Fortress of Solitude and told him that he considered Superboy part of his family. Through VR technology, Superman showed him the final day of Krypton and explained that one of his ancestors had been saved by a man whose name was lost to history. But in gratitude, his family had been adopted into the House of El. That man's descendant was Kon-El, who would have been Superman's cousin. To honor his late ancestor and carry on the family legacy, Superman passed the name Kon-El to Superboy, who tearfully accepted it, finally having a name of his own, since up to that point everyone had simply called him Superboy. Superman also asked Superboy to keep an eye on cloning practices around the world, as the fate of Krypton showed the dangers of this technology. The character later received a major shakeup in the Teen Titans series, where it was revealed that his genetic makeup came from both Superman and Lex Luthor. He adopted the civilian identity of Connor Kent, posing as Clark's cousin and living in Smallville. His appearance also evolved. He now wore a black t-shirt with the red S shield and had a more muscular build. During this period, Superboy Prime from another universe observed Connor's life and declared him unworthy of the Superboy mantle. When Prime arrived on Earth, the two fought, but Connor was no match for the immensely powerful villain and was killed. In typical comic book fashion, Superboy didn't stay dead for long. He was resurrected by the Legion of Superheroes in the future and sent back to the past. During the Reign of Doomsday storyline, he fought Doomsday with telekinetic powers. After the Flashpoint reboot, a new version of Superboy was introduced, with a needlessly complicated origin as a clone of Superman's son from the future. However, in Rebirth, the original Superboy from the previous continuity was brought back, complete with his classic design and personality. The Eradicator. Just like Cyborg Superman, the Eradicator has been around in comics for a few years. Sort of. You see, in his first introduction, the Eradicator was not necessarily a character, but a device. It was an ancient piece of Kryptonian technology created 200,000 years ago. During this time, an alien preacher known simply as the Cleric arrived on Krypton and condemned the planet's cloning practices. On Krypton, people used mindless clones as organ donors, and the morality of this practice became a hotly debated topic among the populace. The Cleric's ideas began gaining followers, and soon Krypton's Science Council declared him a threat. They ordered Kal-El, Superman's distant ancestor, to construct a machine to deal with the Cleric. He created the Eradicator, a device instilled with the purpose of preserving Kryptonian culture and customs. It attacked the Cleric, who miraculously survived, but the assault led to riots in which many died. Following this conflict, the Cleric decided to leave the planet, taking the Eradicator with him, saying that Kryptonians could not be trusted with such a powerful weapon. Some of his most devoted followers went with him, unaware that all Kryptonians carried a genetic flaw that killed them if they left their planet for too long. Shortly after leaving Krypton's orbit, the Cleric's entire crew died, an event that changed his life forever. If you're wondering why Superman didn't die as a baby after leaving Krypton, it's because his father knew about the defect and removed it before his birth. The deaths of his followers traumatized the cleric so deeply that he abandoned preaching and lost his faith. He secluded himself on an asteroid, hoping one day to atone for his sins. The Eradicator, however, kept him alive, and the cleric lived for tens of thousands of years in isolation. One day, Superman ended up on a nearby war world controlled by Mongol. After his captors examined his body and discovered that he was Kryptonian, one of the cell keepers rushed to find the cleric. At first, the cleric didn't believe him, but after linking his mind with Superman's, his doubts were cleared. He saved the Man of Steel from Mongol's brutal gladiator fights, and in the end, passed the Eradicator to him. This was the cleric's way of atoning for his sins, by passing whatever remained of Krypton to its last survivor and saving his life. However, when he let go of the Eradicator, the cleric immediately began to age and soon passed out, as the device had been keeping him alive. Superman brought the device to Earth, but its presence had strange effects on those around it. For example, it turned Jimmy Olsen into a malleable being similar to Plastic Man, causing him extreme pain. Superman threw it into Antarctica, where it grew into a fortress and drew Kryptonian artifacts from the Phantom Zone. Its ultimate goal, however, was to restore Krypton. The device began affecting Superman's psyche and erased certain memories about itself. It then started terraforming Earth in an attempt to turn it into Krypton. Superman eventually regained his memories and rushed to Antarctica to stop the device. He learned that the Eradicator could only be controlled by members of the House of El, but at the time, Superman was unworthy to do so, as he hadn't completed the traditional rite of passage all Kryptonians undergo. After completing the ritual, Superman finally managed to shut the device down. In the following weeks, however, Superman's personality began to change. He became colder and more detached, rarely speaking to his parents and ignoring his friends. It turned out that the Eradicator was still carrying out its plan, but with a different approach. During this time, it completely ruined Clark Kent's life. He was fired from his job, his friends distanced themselves, and he was evicted. Even his crime-fighting style changed. He became more brash and violent, nearly killing one of the alien invaders. He even changed his costume to traditional Kryptonian attire and declared that he would no longer live a double life. In fact, he sought to abandon both the Superman and Clark Kent personas, declaring that only Kal-El would remain. All of this was noticed by his adoptive parents, who rushed to Metropolis. There, Superman tried to rationalize his change and eventually took them to Antarctica, where they were attacked by the Eradicator, which saw them as a threat to Clark's transformation into a perfect Kryptonian. Seeing his parents attacked snapped Superman back to his senses. He defeated the device and tossed it into the sun. It later tried to return in a physical body and tried altering the sun's structure to mimic that of Krypton's, but was defeated again. Following Superman's death at the hands of Doomsday, the Eradicator emerged as one of his replacements, now possessing a humanoid body. He wore a special pair of glasses that had energy-based abilities. The means of his return and transformation were explained later, but at the time, the Eradicator genuinely believed himself to be of Superman reborn, calling himself the last son of Krypton. He appeared in the Fortress of Solitude and seemed to have more sensitive eyes, which is why he wore shades for protection. While he considered himself Superman and sought to continue his heroic legacy, the Eradicator's methods were drastically different. He was more aggressive, lethal, and brash in his crime fighting. At one point, he dangled a criminal in the air for several minutes before leaving him hanging from a 17-story pole. He was also the first of the Superman replacements to meet Lois Lane, telling her that Clark Kent was gone and that only Superman remained. His harsh approach led some of the public to label him a fascist Superman. In another encounter, he faced a bank robber who hadn't directly hurt anyone. The Eradicator decided that death was too harsh a punishment, so instead he broke the man's hands to ensure he would never commit such a crime again, sending him to the hospital. Meanwhile, Guy Gardner learned about the 4 different Supermen and decided to investigate in his own way. He came across the Eradicator during an illegal arms deal and attacked him. During the battle, the Eradicator gained the upper hand, but the criminals intervened, declaring that he would teach them a lesson. The Eradicator blasted the arms dealers, which surprisingly impressed Guy. Gardner stopped fighting, admitting that he only wanted to see if the Eradicator was the real Superman, and after witnessing his actions, said he was the kind of Superman he'd like to have around. Despite Guy's praise, the Eradicator began to question his own approach, wondering if he had been too cruel. His concerns were reaffirmed by Steel. As discussed in the earlier entry, the Eradicator killed a criminal, leading to a conflict with Steel, who reminded him what Superman stood for. Ultimately, the Eradicator concluded that compassion and a human heart are needed for heroism. Another important lesson came from the alien parasite side story that appeared in every entry. This time, it was actually important to the character. Certain people who survived encounters with the parasite developed powers, and one of them was a man who would later be known as Loose Cannon. He teamed up with the Eradicator, and together they fought the aliens, teaching him the values of teamwork and friendship. When Cyborg began his plan, the Eradicator was present in Coast City. During the ensuing conflict, Cyborg seized the advantage of a surprise attack, immobilized the Eradicator, and left him caught in the explosion that destroyed the city. Although his physical body was eradicated, he survived as an energy being and rushed back to the Fortress of Solitude to recover, where he discovered that the real Superman had already come back to life and left. Meanwhile, Cyborg pinned the destruction of the city on him. This is where we learn the means of the Eradicator's transformation. While recovering in the Fortress of Solitude, his robot servants cleared his mind of delusions, and the truth was revealed. Following Superman's death, the Eradicator tried to take over his body to preserve Krypton's heritage, but failed. Instead, it generated its own body resembling Superman's, and took the actual Superman's body back to the Fortress of Solitude to heal in the Healing Matrix, which also served as its energy source. His recovery at the fortress was slow, and realizing the danger Superman was in, he asked his servants to accelerate it, but they warned that it would drain the fortress's energy. Despite this, the Eradicator persisted and kept regenerating. In the end, he emerged healthy, but had drained so much energy that the fortress was destroyed. He rejoined the battle at Coast City, but Superman mistrusted him, saying that he would deal with the Eradicator after defeating Hank. This is where the Eradicator revealed that Superman wasn't just in a coma, as he believed, but was categorically deceased, and that the Eradicator managed to bring him back to life due to unique circumstances that possibly could not be replicated again. In the final clash, as Cyborg blasted Superman with kryptonite energy, the Eradicator stood in his way and absorbed the blast, sacrificing himself to save the true last son of Krypton, with his body transforming the blast to restore Superman's powers. Following this storyline, unlike the other Superman replacements, the Eradicator didn't appear as much in subsequent stories. In typical comic fashion, he was brought back to life by bonding with a deceased human, David Connor, even joining the team known as the Outsiders. He would re-emerge occasionally, sometimes with a different humanoid form. His final storyline before the reboot was the Reign of Doomsday, during which he was killed. In the New 52 reboot, the Eradicator was created by General Zod and was obsessed with Kryptonian purity, even trying to fight Superman's son for being half-human. His origin with the Cleric was brought back in Rebirth, but some of the New 52 elements remained intact, and he mostly served as a villain during this time. And this concludes our massive breakdown. If you managed to sit through this long and perhaps even convoluted video, then there's a good chance you enjoy comic books. So consider subscribing to this channel for more in-depth lore breakdowns like this one. If you enjoyed this storyline and want to read it yourself, there are reading recommendations in the video's description, along with links to purchase the comics. Using our link not only helps support the channel, but also supports the actual writers and artists who brought these stories to life. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for future uploads.